So good afternoon, everybody. All right, I want a little bit of participation here. How many of you in the audience are students? Raise your hand. Okay, it's about 10, 12 students. How many of you are professors? Raise your hand. Okay, thank you. And how many of you work for a non-university, a company or a government? Raise your hands. Okay, about 5 or 6 or 7. And how many of you have no idea? Okay, that's helpful. I will talk about how a region grows its economy through innovation. And later on, my colleague, Mr. Sweeney, who you just met, will talk about how to grow the economy through exports. So we will complement or augment each other. So, if you remember, I'm the former dean of the Kogod School of Business. I'm also an information technology professor for many, many years. And that's why I'm particularly interested in the topic of innovation. So let me give you a little bit of background. And those of you who are here all day, you already have a little bit of a taste for our wonderful city of Washington, D.C. So let me show you a little map. So in the middle there, that little area in red is the capital. It's Washington, D.C. It is where the White House is. It's where the U.S. Congress is. But most of the people in metropolitan Washington, D.C. live in the 2 states or 2 provinces, if I use the Chinese expressions, next to Washington, the state of Maryland and the state of Virginia. So for example, I live in the state of Maryland and my friend Mr. Sweeney lives in the state of Virginia. None of us who are here from American University actually live in the city of Washington, D.C. So it is very much about the metropolitan area of Washington, D.C. that we are talking about here. A little bit of a comparison. The size of the metropolitan area that you can see here is about the same. It's 14,000 or 16,000 square kilometers. Population is quite different. And we heard from our friend over there, I think he's still there, that he wants to limit the population of Beijing. We don't have that concern, I think, in Washington. The median household income is quite different, as you would expect as business and economic students. But the purchasing power is quite different, of course. Now, let me set up Washington in I think what is an important way to understand Washington as a business city. You are here in Beijing, you are in one of the 2 or 3 major business cities of China. It is obvious to you that Beijing and business are going to be leaders. I know that you in Shanghai, you fight with one another over who is better, Beijing or Shanghai, but certainly Beijing is one of the major business cities. If you think about it, most capital cities in the world are also the major business city. So that's true for London, that's true for Paris, it's true for Mexico City, it's true for Moscow, and so on. It is really the minority of countries where the capital is not the major business city. And so this is a list that I compiled. I'll just read the first few. There's Canada. Do you know that the capital of Canada is Ottawa? How many of you knew that before I showed you that? The capital of New Zealand is Wellington. The capital of Australia is a small city called Canberra. And then we have the United States and so on. So we have a very interesting situation, which is a little bit different than Beijing. Now, Washington, D.C. is not the major technology city in the United States, major technology area. What is the major technology area in the United States? Students, raise your hands.
They got it. They said San Francisco.
Okay, San Francisco, and then nearby, very close to San Francisco, is Silicon Valley. Yes. Washington, D.C. is considered one of the major technology centers in the United States. Here what you see is a ranking of cities based on how technological they are. Of course, number one is Silicon Valley. And it will be number one for many years, I anticipate. Number two is a city that is very close to San Francisco. It's to Silicon Valley, it's San Francisco. And Washington, as you can see here, is number 7. In a big country like the United States, this isn't too bad. However, on rankings of entrepreneurial cities, on this ranking, Washington, D.C. doesn't look that good. The number 1 city here is Austin, a large city in Texas. It's also the capital of the state of Texas. Austin is famous for many technology firms that have come out of there. And way down on the list, number 30 is Washington. But as you'll see, that story is a little bit complicated. So what is Washington known for? It is known, of course, its image. It's known as a political city. It's where the President of the United States is, the U.S. Congress. It's where political decisions are made. It's where money is handed out. All right, so with that as a background, I want to now address why we care about innovation. Well, why innovation? Why am I talking about innovation about a big metropolitan city? Well, there's a few very important reasons. One is job growth. Most job growth comes from businesses that are young, less than 5 years old, and those tend to be technology companies or technology-enabled companies. Number 2 is GDP. Businesses based on technology and innovation provide about 20% of the national GDP. And finally, looking at big historical waves, new technologies, as they come to the marketplace, they create the next industrial waves that are very important. Think of the internet boom that began about 20 years ago, or the social media boom that began about 10 years ago. Right, so let's look at Washington, D.C., and let's look at what is needed for regional innovation in Washington, D.C. There's 4 things that are needed. So I'll talk about each of them. People, money, entrepreneurs, and an ecosystem. Now these 4 things are needed in any region, whether it be Washington, D.C., or Beijing, or a city in South Africa, and so on. These are standard elements of creating regional innovation. Let's talk about each one of them in Washington. Let's start with people. As my colleague Jim Deniger talked about this morning, Washington, D.C. has the number 1 talented workforce in the United States. The Washington, D.C. region has the most talented workforce. 49% of the residents have university degrees. This is the number 1 metropolitan area in the United States with these kind of statistics. This is actually a reason why I love, personally, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region, because people are very smart. You don't meet that many unintelligent people in the street, and that's nice. I like that. Let's talk about the role of universities, which is very important. Many studies consistently show around the world that successful regions have a high level of investment between business and universities. Here in Beijing, you actually do that quite well. In Washington, D.C., we have some challenges. And here, beginning with this point, I will talk about the challenges, the problems, the weaknesses that we have in Washington, D.C. to create an innovation economy, or to grow it, really. So in Washington, D.C., in our region, we have no world-class STEM university. That's the bullet point in the middle over there. STEM stands for science, technology, what's E? Engineering, and M is math. Science, technology, engineering, math. So there is no STEM world-class university unless you go north to Baltimore. And the city of Baltimore, which is not too far from Washington, it's about 50 kilometers away. It's a little bit like the relationship between Beijing and Tianjin. Although Tianjin is a little bit further away. It's 150 kilometers away. How much?
75 kilometers. How far away?
120.
120. Okay, so it's closer. 120 is far enough. In Washington, our relationship with Baltimore, with 50 kilometers, is one that's a little bit far for some things, and so sometimes Washington and Baltimore are together, sometimes they're not, depending on how it's discussed. So if Baltimore is included in Greater Washington, D.C., then there is one STEM university, and that's Johns Hopkins, which is very well known internationally, especially for its medical research and its medical school. And it is a recipient of very large grants, especially from government, but also from the private sector. The second, remember I talked about four things. So we talked about people. The second thing I want to talk about is money. So where does money come from? Well, this is the capital city. So first of all, money comes from the American federal government and its R&D funding. Washington, D.C., it has a very high concentration of research funding from the government. About $26 billion stays in Washington, D.C. But the U.S. federal spending has, especially in Washington, has gone down now for about 5 years and is expected politically to continue to go down. At best to stay the same, but probably go down by 1 or 2% a year in the Washington region. And so policymakers in Washington are saying, well, if we can't rely on the government to grow the economy, we have to grow in some other way. So there have to be other sources of money for innovation. We're still on money. Another source of money is venture capital. So in the Washington area, there were 350 deals last year for startup companies. $1.5 billion were raised. Is this a lot or a little?
Little.
Well, for most places in the world, this is pretty good. But relative to the rest of the United States, as you can see in that third bullet point over there, it's only 2% of American venture capital. That means that in Washington, D.C., there's not enough action. So our region is far behind Silicon Valley and Boston and so on. One more on money. In 2016, in the second quarter, Washington, D.C. companies raised almost $200 million. So that's a rise of 11%, but there's a decrease relative to 2015. Let me just give you a sample of some of the deals that have been taking place. So a company based in Baltimore raised $44 million for eye therapy. Another company raised $15 million for hospital pharmacy kit processing software. And the third company that I'll mention raised $15 million for cloud infrastructure. So as you can see in this sample of the larger deals that are very fresh, 2 of them have to do with medical and health. Okay, so remember I talked about 4 things to make the region successful. So now I'm on to number 3, which is entrepreneurs. So the picture there is complicated. I showed you before a ranking that a lot of people look at in terms of regions in the United States, and Washington, D.C. didn't look that good. But if you look at it from a different perspective, Washington, D.C. has small business formation that's better than Boston or Silicon Valley. So it's the thick blue line is the rate of business formation. These are new companies that are setting up. So the other 2 lines, if you can't read that, are Boston and Silicon Valley. So this is good. And also, if you look at another very important list, which is a ranking of the 500 fastest growing young companies in the United States, the 3 political areas, the 3 provinces of Washington, D.C., all do very well. The 2 on the left there with the circles, with the ovals, are Maryland and Washington. They have the most companies in the Inc. 500, which is a very well-respected list. So in Washington, entrepreneurs actually are quite successful in many ways. So it's a complicated picture of what's happening in terms of innovation. The last of the 4